Before refrigerators existed, before supermarkets were on every corner, before anyone had ever heard of a meal kit delivery service, Japanese home cooks had already solved most of the problems we're spending money to fix today. And I don't mean solved in a rough, primitive way and inside. I mean solved with such elegance and precision that food scientists are still studying these techniques and finding out they actually work better than the modern alternatives we replace them with. What you're about to hear is not trendy wellness advice or social media food hacks with no real history behind them. These are techniques passed down through generations in Japanese households, some of them hundreds of years old, that will change how you shop, how you store food, how you cook, and how much money walks out of your kitchen every single month without you even noticing. If food waste, grocery bills, or just getting more flavor out of what you already buy are things you care about, stay with me, because this is going to be worth every minute. Let's start with the one that might genuinely reframe how you think about cooking altogether. In Japan, there is a concept called mottainai. It translates roughly to what a waste, but it carries a weight that English doesn't quite capture. It's a word rooted in Buddhist philosophy that expresses deep regret over waste of any kind. In the kitchen, mottainai is not a technique. It's the mindset that produces all the techniques. Japanese home cooks historically looked at every part of an ingredient and asked, what can this do? Vegetable peels, fish bones, the water you boiled your rice in. Nothing was immediately discarded without asking whether it still had value. And almost everything did. Once you start looking at your kitchen through the lens of mottainai, you stop throwing away money disguised as scraps. Keep that idea running in the background as we go through each of these hacks, because it connects all of them. The first practical hack is one that saves an enormous amount of money for anyone who buys fresh produce and watches it wilt before they get to use it. In traditional Japanese kitchens, leafy vegetables like spinach, komatsuna, and green onions were stored wrapped in a slightly damp cloth or newspaper, not sealed in plastic bags, not thrown loose in the crisper drawer. The logic is simple, but the science backs it up. Vegetables respire, meaning they breathe, and they need a small amount of moisture and airflow to stay alive without rotting. A sealed plastic bag traps ethylene gas, which is the gas vegetables produce as they age, and that gas accelerates spoilage for everything nearby. A damp cloth wrap allows moisture to stay consistent, lets the vegetable breathe, and slows down cellular breakdown dramatically. Studies in food science confirm that storing leafy greens this way can extend their fresh life by up to 3 to 5 days longer than plastic. Across a month of groceries, that is a meaningful amount of food that stops going in the bin. The second hack is about rice water. And if you've been pouring this down the drain your entire life, that stops today. When you rinse raw rice before cooking, the water that comes off it is cloudy and starchy. In Japanese households, this water, called kominukasui or simply rice washing water, was saved and used for multiple purposes. In the kitchen specifically, it was used to tenderize meat, to blanch vegetables in a way that removes bitterness more effectively than plain water, and to soak burdock root and other earthy vegetables to neutralize their strong, astringent flavors. The starch in the water acts as a gentle binding agent during blanching and draws out compounds in vegetables that plain water simply doesn't address as efficiently.
Put a little bit of water in there and then let it just gently soak around, and you want to get rid of that first water away. And you see how white the water is? And then you want to put the rice back in the pot and you want to mix it like this. You want to have your finger like this and just circle around.
Beyond the kitchen, this same water has been used for centuries as a skin tonic and hair rinse. But even if you only use it for cooking, you're extracting additional value from something you were already paying for and throwing away. The third hack involves something called kakushiaji, which translates to hidden flavor. This is one of the most sophisticated flavor concepts in Japanese cooking, and it has nothing to do with adding more of the same ingredient. Kakushiaji is the practice of adding a tiny amount of a contrasting ingredient to amplify the primary flavor of a dish. Not enough for that ingredient to be detectable on its own, but just enough to make everything around it taste more fully like itself. A pinch of salt in sweet dishes to deepen sweetness. A few drops of soy sauce in a beef stew that isn't Japanese at all, because the glutamates in soy sauce boost savory depth without the dish tasting like soy sauce. A tiny amount of sugar in a salty broth to round the edges without making it sweet. A small piece of kamo seaweed in almost any simmering liquid to add a backbone of umami that makes cheaper ingredients taste like they cost twice as much. This is why a simple Japanese home-cooked meal made from inexpensive ingredients can taste more complex and satisfying than an expensive dish cooked without this awareness. Kakushiaji is not about spending more. It's about thinking more carefully, which is always free. The fourth hack is about fish, and it directly addresses one of the most expensive and wasteful habits in modern Western cooking: buying boneless, skinless fillets and leaving it at that. In Japan, the whole fish was and still is the standard, and the parts that Western supermarkets discard in spats, the head, the bones, the collar, the skin, are considered by Japanese cooks to be among the most flavorful and valuable parts of the animal. Fish heads and bones simmered in water for 20 to 30 minutes with a piece of kombu, a splash of sake, and a little ginger produce a dashi stock, a base liquid, that has more depth and nutrition than almost any store-bought broth you can buy. Salmon collars, which are often available for almost nothing at fish counters because most customers don't ask for them, are incredibly rich in fat and flavor and take less than 15 minutes to cook under a broiler with salt. Buying a whole fish or asking your fishmonger for parts that would otherwise be trashed means you're getting far more value per dollar from the same animal. This is not about eating fish scraps out of necessity. In Japan, these cuts are considered delicacies. The fifth hack is one of the oldest preservation methods in Japanese culinary history, and it requires nothing more than salt, time, and a container. Tsukemono, Japanese pickles, or chitsukan chikipikona are fermented or salt-pressed vegetables that were originally developed not as a side dish, but as a preservation strategy. Cucumbers, daikon radish, cabbage, carrots, eggplant, almost any vegetable can be transformed through salt pressing or brine fermentation into something that lasts weeks or even months. The simplest version requires nothing more than salting sliced vegetables, placing them under a weight for a few hours, and letting osmosis draw out the moisture and concentrate the flavor. The result is a crunchy, deeply flavored preserved vegetable that pairs with almost any meal and costs almost nothing to make from vegetables that are already in your refrigerator. When you start thinking about vegetables that are 2 days from going soft as Tsukemono candidates rather than food waste, you are operating exactly the way Japanese households have operated for centuries. The sixth hack is about knives, and it will save you from spending money on replacements or professional sharpening services far more often than you need to. Japanese knife culture is ancient and precise, and the home practice that came out of it is this: a ceramic coffee mug turned upside down. The unglazed ceramic ring on the bottom of almost any standard coffee mug has the same basic abrasive quality as a sharpening stone at a medium grit. Running a knife blade across it at the correct angle, roughly 15 to 20 degrees, will restore a working edge to a dull blade in under 2 minutes. This was a standard Japanese home kitchen practice long before the global knife industry sold people on the idea that sharpening required special equipment. It won't replace a proper whetstone for serious maintenance, but for keeping your knives functional between proper sharpenings, it is entirely effective and costs you nothing beyond what you already own.
Donc, on va aiguiser ce couteau à fond. Donc, je vais juste utiliser le fond du gobelet ici. Et ça fait vraiment mal de faire ça à chaque fois, mais ce n'est vraiment pas un son agréable. Bon, que diriez-vous d'un vieux papier de verre?
A sharp knife is also a safer knife. Dull blades require more force and are responsible for a disproportionate number of kitchen injuries. The seventh hack is about the way Japanese cooks have historically managed cooking fuel and energy. Because before modern gas and electric ranges, heat was a resource that had to be used carefully. The technique is called yonetsu, residual heat cooking. The principle is finishing food using the heat already stored in the pot, pan, or surrounding environment rather than continuing to apply an external flame. You bring something to a boil or a near boil, then turn off the heat, cover it tightly, and allow the retained thermal energy to finish the cooking process. This works remarkably well for rice, eggs, fish, and even certain cuts of meat. In modern kitchens, this translates directly into lower energy bills. The average household that adopts residual heat cooking for rice and eggs alone uses measurably less gas or electricity per month. Across a year, that adds up to real money. The eighth hack is about dashi, which is the foundational stock of Japanese cooking, and specifically about why making it yourself instead of buying it in powdered packets or pre-made cartons is one of the best cost to flavor decisions you can make in a kitchen. Dashi is made primarily from kombu, dried kelp, and katsuobushi, which are dried, fermented, and shaved bonito fish flakes. The technique is deliberately gentle. Kombu is soaked in cold water for anywhere from 30 minutes to overnight, and then brought slowly to just below a boil. Never a full boil, because boiling kombu makes the stock bitter and slimy. The katsuobushi is then added, steeped for a few minutes, and strained out. The entire process takes less time than driving to a store, and a small amount of dried kombu and katsuobushi, both of which are inexpensive and last essentially forever in a pantry, produces a stock of extraordinary quality that forms the base of miso soup, ramen, udon, sauces, and braises. The used kombu and katsuobushi can then be simmered a second time for a lighter secondary stock called nibandashi, or the kombu can be sliced and eaten.
Which we are gonna repurpose used kombu without tossing away. I got 3 Japanese vegan recipes for you. Let's talk about the kombu. About 90% of kombu you find in Japan is harvested in the Hokkaido area, located.
Nothing is wasted. Everything earns its place. The 9th hack is perhaps the most practical one for anyone who cooks proteins at home, and consistently ends up with results that are either too tough, too dry, or both. It's called shio-koji, salt and koji. Koji is the mold Aspergillus oryzae that is responsible for fermenting sake, miso, and soy sauce. When rice is inoculated with koji and combined with salt, it produces a paste that is one of the most powerful natural tenderizers and flavor enhancers in the culinary world. Rubbing shio-koji on chicken, pork, or fish and letting it rest for anywhere from a few hours to overnight results in a protein that is noticeably more tender, more moist, and more complex in flavor than the same cut prepared with salt alone. Because the enzymes in koji break down proteins and convert starches into sugars, which also means you get better browning, better crust, and more natural flavor development during cooking. Shio-koji is available in Japanese grocery stores and increasingly in mainstream supermarkets, and a jar of it lasts months in the refrigerator. Cheaper cuts of meat treated with shio-koji overnight can genuinely rival the texture and flavor of cuts that cost significantly more. That is the definition of a money-saving kitchen tool. The 10th and final hack is about something that Japanese home cooks have understood intuitively for centuries, that Western nutrition science has only recently confirmed with data. That the order in which you eat the components of a meal significantly affects how your body processes the entire meal. In traditional Japanese dining, raw or lightly pickled vegetables are typically eaten first, followed by soup, then protein, and rice is eaten last or throughout. This order is not arbitrary aesthetic preference. Research published in the last decade in Kvalpat, including studies from Kyoto Prefectural University of Medicine, has found that eating vegetables and fiber before carbohydrates significantly slows glucose absorption, which means more stable blood sugar, more sustained energy, and fewer cravings that lead to unnecessary snacking and additional food spending throughout the day. When you feel genuinely full and energized after a meal, you eat less between meals. When you eat less between meals, your grocery bill is lower, your food lasts longer, and your body functions better. The Japanese concept of hara hachi bu, eating until you are 80% full, compounds this effect, and it's one of the most consistently cited habits in research on the longevity of people in Okinawa, who are among the longest-lived populations ever studied. Here's what all 10 of these hacks have in common, and it's worth saying out loud because it changes the way you'll carry them with you. None of them require you to buy anything special. None of them require expensive equipment, exotic subscriptions, or kitchen renovation. They require something much more available and much more valuable than any of that: attention. The Japanese kitchen tradition that produced all of these techniques was built in conditions of scarcity, where waste was not an option, and every ingredient had to give everything it had. The result was not a diminished cooking experience, it was a richer one. Better flavor, less waste, lower cost, and a relationship with food that was rooted in genuine understanding rather than convenience. The mottainai mindset we started with is the frame that holds all of this together. When you start asking, what else can this do? Before you throw something away, you've already adopted the most important Japanese kitchen hack of all. The rest is just practice.